Well, welcome to the Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series, or the SLPS. My name is Sally Hopley. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator here at Metropolitan Community College. The SLPS is a collaborative live broadcast of highly qualified and credible speakers presenting on regional topics of sustainability and global and local environmental issues. The SLPS stimulates needed discussion and provides examples for action, planning, and problem solving for leadership and environmental sustainability. This collaborative event is the combined effort of Central Community College, Creighton University, Hastings College, Joslin Institute for Sustainable Communities, the Universities of Nebraska at Omaha and Lincoln, Metropolitan Community College, and the Nebraska Recycling Council. Today's topic is on closing the loop, or how Metropolitan Community College, how our culinary and horticulture departments reduce waste, improve soil health, and help to support pollinator species. So for this presentation today, we have three speakers. Next slide, please. We have Brian O'Malley. Brian is the Associate Dean of Culinary, Hospitality, and Horticulture. Chef O'Malley's first experience cooking for others was a backpacking trip for Boy Scouts. There he learned the importance of bringing just what you need, cooking it right, feeding as many people as possible, and leaving the campsite better than you found it. This training has served him well on the boards of the Nebraska Sustainable Agriculture Society, the Gretchen Swanson Center for Nutrition, and various other industry organizations. At MCC, he continues to seek ways to integrate sustainability initiatives into the classroom. We also have Casey Craven, the culinary lab technician. 10 years working in Omaha restaurant community has made Casey keenly aware of the need for increasing the care and attention with which we approach the stewardship of our resources. As a lab technician at the culinary school, Casey sees that his work has the chance to impact not only his current employer's habits, but also impact the decisions made by future leaders of our community. And then we also have Tyler Magnuson, the horticulture operations specialist and culinary liaison. As the operations specialist, Tyler oversees the horticulture production garden, many ornamental and pollinator gardens, and the greenhouse and classroom material organization. Tyler also teaches in the HLSM department classes, including vegetable production and fruit production. Tyler has earned a bachelor's in sustainable agriculture from the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. Prior to working at MCC, Tyler owned and operated a small vegetable production farm in Southwest Iowa and was a farm manager on various operations, including community crops in Lincoln, and co-founded Big Muddy Urban Farm in Omaha. Thank you all for being here with us today. A few housekeeping rules. So you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen, we have Q&A and we have chat. We'd like to ask you to use the chat during the presentation to speak amongst yourselves, and to use the Q&A to enter questions. And later in our presentation today, we do have some time set aside for questions. So feel free to put those in the Q&A throughout the presentation, and we will answer those at the end. But again, thank you all for being here, and thank you to our MCC IT staff for supporting us in this effort today. So here's our agenda for our presentation. We're going to go through where we started in our industrial compost collection. We'll go to where we are now, how we've been working on changing habits, how we've been using this industrial compost collection and compost to improve our pollinator habitat. And then again, we'll end on that Q&A. Next slide, please. Okay, so where we started, at the beginning of our journey, we were doing some internal composting. And then we did a waste audit in 2019 that helped to show the opportunities that we had to expand our composting collection. And also two other issues that help to support our composting collection is our sustainability master plan, and then our HE report, which is a higher education sustainability report. Next slide.
So here you can see a picture on the left is the garden and composting area when I started here at Metro over 5 years ago. We kind of transitioned the garden and compost together to a more high efficiency systems. The compost you can see on the right, we had facilities build us a block walled 2-bay system that our Bobcat skid steer could operate. And so that kind of changed us from a very residential model, which is, you know, pallets holding up compost that you might see I use in my own backyard, to something that can handle more waste. And we're handling the waste from the garden, but also starting to incorporate food waste from the culinary department. And that all happened through just kind of conversation and slowly moving forward one step at a time. It wasn't a giant kind of system audit that inspired that. It was a lot of conversation and just slowly working to get better. And yeah, I think the most important piece in all of that was working with the culinary folks to know no potatoes or no orange peels. Like our composting system was lower temperature and couldn't handle some of the stuff that we can now handle. And so that was a key piece in making it work, was making sure we were efficient with our time and only using materials in it that could be handled by the temperatures in our compost system. You can go to the next slide. And so while we started on that, we started a bunch of different tracking, but specifically did some compost tracking as far as weight. So Casey or the Casey before Casey helped us do some weighing when we left the ICA building here on the Fort Omaha campus of how much we were bringing over. We were trying to identify times where our composting setup here could not handle the volume from the ICA. And this is not the volume from the whole building, but was just the volume from kind of the operation side, catering side, or like cleaning out the cooler at the end of the quarter. So we're only getting a small slice, and we knew that, but we wanted to be efficient in how we dealt with that small slice. And we're also tracking here the amount of composting we're putting back on our field too. So this was an important kind of key indicator that while our composting could handle up to 3,000 pounds of organic matter in this year, 2019, I think, we were also missing hundreds of pounds of organic matter from the small slice that we were using, that we needed something that could catch that overflow and then eventually catch the rest of the organic waste from that building.
So in 2019, the culinary and horticulture departments participated in a waste audit or a materials audit. And so we looked at, I believe it was close to a week's worth of trash, recycling, and compost from both those buildings, which was actually pretty handy because both of these departments are located on our Fort campus and kind of across the road from one another. So it is fairly easy for them to partner because they are so close in proximity and work closely together. So when we were looking at specifically the landfill, we did not get a ton of landfill from the horticulture department. So these results are focused on the culinary department. So throughout this process, we went through about 300 pounds. That is both waste, recycling, and compost. And what we saw, one of the biggest takeaways is that we had over 70% of the materials in the culinary landfill could have been industrially composted. So that helped to solidify our suspicion that, hey, we think that we would be able to divert a lot if we went to an industrial compost collection. So something else that helped us support our goal of starting this industrial compost is that we created a sustainability master plan in 2020. And one of the categories in that master plan is that we were looking to increase our diversion rate. So our baseline from 2018, 2019 was a 12% diversion rate. And our goal for 2026 is a 30% diversion rate. And when we were looking at, compost is a key strategy in waste diversion. And so if we wanted to look at where would be the best place to start compost, these two departments are really key. And that's because we do not have like a large cafeteria system like a lot of the four-year institutions do. So one of the biggest generators of compostable waste is actually culinary and horticulture. So this was an excellent place to start to help us move our diversion rate numbers.
Well, I have two quick things to say here before we move on to our next section. One is that if you have the opportunity to read a copy of the Sustainability Master Plan, I know Sally may not promote it like this because she's a key author of it, but it really is a marvelous piece of reading, and it's one of the most honest and vulnerable pieces of corporate literature I've ever seen, right? That it freely admits the places where we're not living up to the best practices that we ourselves set as goals. And I think that that's what it takes in order to be able to stretch to those kinds of things. So if you get a chance, read it. If for nothing else, it's honesty, but I also think it's inspirational as well. And then I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that this goal of 30% diversion rate is a college-wide goal, not necessarily the goal for culinary and horticulture. I think our chances here for diversion from landfill can be much higher than that, and hopefully help lead that number up to 30%. So that's all I got to say there.
Thank you, Brian. Oh, sir, we can go ahead.
Oh, you want to stay on this? Yeah, go for it.
Just one more thing. The Sustainability Master Plan, it does support our involvement in HE Stars. HE Stars is a higher education sustainability report. It was something that we were already doing before the master plan. And a lot of the metrics in that master plan are based on HE Stars credits. And just as another point of reference or something to support this, there is a section of that STARS report that focuses on waste reduction. And so it helps support our overall effort in that reporting process as well. Sorry, next slide.
So over this next minute or two, we'll hear from Casey a little bit about the internal stakeholders as well as the partners that we connected with as we moved forward.
So when we pulled together multiple departments to start this composting collection system, and once we started to do that and look at what we had in place, we found a lot of wins across the board. So this is a rainy day photo of an unattractive landfill dumpster in front of the culinary building. And
with some compostable material on the ground outside of the dumpster. That makes me a little sad too.
Yeah. And so when we were having these conversations, one thing that we discovered is that our facilities team was rather anxious to remove that dumpster away from the building. Part of the reason being is that because it had so much food waste in it, it was actually attracting a little bit of a rodent issue on the campus. And so it worked for them very well to have to remove that landfill dumpster, because what we ended up doing is that farther away from the building, there is a brick, we call it a corral, but that's where all of the composting bins went. So that meant that all of that material that was causing an issue right up front was not only being diverted from the landfill, but was going away from the building and becoming less of an issue for facilities. There was also reduced labor for them because the culinary and horticulture departments manage this stream mostly internally. That's less of their staff has to pick up as well. Culinary, they also, again, reducing waste and educating on best practices, and the same in horticulture as well. And because horticulture no longer had to focus on trying to capture as much as possible from the culinary departments to compost themselves, they could use the compost pile as more just for the garden and as an educational opportunity. It reduced some labor on their side as well. And then in my world, again, it helps with our diversion rates. It bakes in education on composting in the student and staff experience, and it helps meet those goals in the master plan.
So two things I want to note in this picture before we move on. One is that the dock is right up next to the dumpster, which allowed for ridiculously heavy trash cans, which means full of things that are compostable, to be easy to dump into that dumpster, right? That you could roll out a 50-gallon trash can that's got all sorts of wet peels, et cetera, but you weren't motivating the person that's dumping it to do something different with it, because it's easy to dump when you're above the dumpster like this. The other thing, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, is just tucked in the right side of this picture is a fryer oil collection bin, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well, but I don't want to have to come back to this picture, so I thought I'd say, hey, take note of that now.
Yeah, so one of the main things that we did to help with that diversion process was integrating in Hillside. And so, over the next coming few slides here, we're going to talk about how we changed from where we were to what we are now, utilizing Hillside and some new processes that we created. So one of the first things we did, and that Sally provided when they first started this, was kind of a map of the building and locations that were suggested for trash bins, composting bins, and disposal bins. And all of those are kind of marked by their distinguishing, whether it's a box, an X, a check mark, throughout the building. And so one of the things that we kind of looked at when putting those is making sure that we color coordinated the bins according to what the standards were. So green for composting, red for glass, blue for mixed recycling, and trash either being gray or black. And so by doing that, we helped create a moment in the beginning that had a little bit of consistency and differentiating properties that we could easily see. As we kind of moved on, and we're going to go on to the next slide here, you can see that we changed it up a little bit once we integrated Hillside by actually reducing the number of those points. So instead of having 12 trash cans in every room, we went down to having 3, or 1 of each color, basically, to help provide more of a critical control point for product getting dumped. So we didn't have to monitor 12 different trash cans in every room. Now we're just monitoring 1 set of trash cans. That allowed us, 1, to catch any product that could have been composted and was in the trash pile to be composted. But 2, it also allowed our students to become more aware of how much product they were getting rid of. It allows them to be more self-conscious of, oh, could I use this for my mashed potatoes rather than throwing this bit of potato away? Or can I use this product for something else? And so that was one of the things that we really wanted to look at too. Not only how can we increase the quantity of product we're composting, but how can we decrease the quantity of product that we're getting rid of and not utilizing in classes? And so on each station, we've actually provided the class with a, I think it's a 2-quart or a half-gallon bucket that is color coordinated as well with the product that or the cans that we're using. That way, during the class, they can use those buckets, and as they become filled, they take them into another room where we have our recycling bin, our compost bin, and our main trash bins for that area. And then at the end of the day, those lined bins get rolled down to that trash corral and properly disposed of in that trash corral, whether it's in the trash bin, recycling, composting, and so on and so forth. This has provided many learning opportunities for the students, and it's also provided many opportunities for us to see how we need to continue to change and grow. And so if we move to the next slide, one thing that we realized was proper signage for our bins and for the area. So one thing that we've created were a few sets of signs that had the specific coloring, coordinating, and examples of what can go into those bins. So this example is actually a sign on its own that we created to go in multiple spots in the room versus just over every bin. So this is kind of a pie chart, I would call it, of the colors and what can go in those specific bins for the exact lab use. And then over each bin is actually its own, whether it's composting, recycling, landfill, or glass label. That way we provide a little bit extra signage and specifications for those bins.
Above this green bin in the breakout space here, Case, you can see the individual one. That's an old version, but you can see that, you know, each bin is getting its own label in order to support that kind of branding throughout the process.
Correct, yeah. And then, like we said, it also gave us a more centralized location. Instead of having those 12 different bins throughout the room that we had to monitor and watch, we didn't just have the one set in those specific areas. And then so as we went in, Sally was able to help, you know, provide some numbers that we've gotten from Hillside and just some numbers that we're seeing. And we're seeing that constant growth of, you know, that estimated 1,800 pounds of compost every week. On our end, what that really looks like is that's one full Slim Jim trash can, which I believe is 50 gallons, if I remember right, something along that line, of trash or of compost from 2 classes. So 2 classes will fill that bin. So we're seeing these bins come from our labs that are filled with 2 classes every day, come down at least once a day completely filled. So if that kind of gives a retrospect of how full those are every day.
So that really leads to what I would say is our great challenge that we're facing, is that we started this work at the bottom end of this pyramid, right? This is the EPA food waste recovery pyramid. And it talks about, you know, diverting at the bottom of this pyramid, right? The point that it comes down to is how much stuff you're sending to landfill. And we wanted to shrink that so that more of it was going to compost. But we've got more work to do going up this pyramid, right? So to Casey's point of a full trash can every day coming from 2 classes is more product that's probably usable in other ways, much higher up on this pyramid than we're using for it now. That composting is one of the easiest to divert from going into the landfill container to going into the compost container has been a relatively easy, if long coming behavior change. These other behavior changes may take us a little while, but if we can institute the same kind of strategic, structural, kind of systems level approach that we did for composting, hopefully we can pivot to some better uses, better industrial uses. And I think this move up the pyramid seems to make the most, or be the most deployable. It isn't the most efficient, maybe, that it would be more efficient to reduce what we're bringing in at the top. That would have the most impact, but that's a terribly difficult thing to implement because we've got hundreds of incoming moments. You have one outgoing moment, or we did, landfill. And so now we're adding different outgoings. And then when we change that to also adding, how can we use this for industrial purpose, which we do, right? We capture and recycle fryer waste oil to be used for biodiesel. So that happens. And then up from there, I'd say we feed animals, but it's not nearly the size of band it should be, right? Like every 3 months, we get Tyler to take something over to feed the chickens with. It doesn't happen as regularly as possible, and chickens aren't going to eat nearly as much as they should. We need to find some people with pigs. And then up from that, we only have a few hunger relief initiatives in place at the college. They are valuable, but they're not taking advantage of. They're not aligned with waste reduction measures, right? That right now, in order to provide some hunger relief to people that are food insecure, we're bringing another input into the system in order to do that, rather than diverting, using up, repurposing product that we already have. So we still face a lot of challenges here, but I think that by systemically addressing this first big step of diversion and seeing the impact of it, we're going to have some footing to keep moving up this pyramid in a meaningful way. So that's that game. This next section on changing habits, really one of our favorite things to do, and we talk about this as a culinary school prerogative, not just a waste reduction initiative, but when you focus on the behaviors you're trying to change rather than the minds you're trying to change, you can gain momentum faster. So frequently, and I see this in the environmental sustainability channel all the time, is that we approach the conversation with thinking that we need to convince people of the need to compost, rather than simply making it as easy to compost as to throw away. And when we changed that, when we decided to say, well, let's change their action, not their mind, well, then we got success. Now, whether that changes their mind or not, we're not measuring, but that doesn't impact sustainability to just change their mind. It only impacts sustainability to change their habit. And so we've forever been coming at this from, let's convince people of the value and then the behaviors will follow. But the truth is we never moved the needle that way. We moved the needle when we said, let's make it easier to put that in the compost bin than the trash can. And now we moved the needle. And that's what happened here. Casey, you can take the reins now.
Yeah, so this is kind of our little thing of, breaking through that hard surface so something awesome can start to bloom and grow. And, this picture just did it the best and fits in with the sustainability process of this, a plant slowly making its way through a crack or through an opening that is started in a cement walkway or driveway and whatnot. So this is kind of our perfect little way of kind of how I looked at how do we rethink and look at new ways to start moving forward. And so one of those things is, every day at the first week of the quarter, we're in with every class, talking with them about, how we're properly composting and recycling, and then also constantly in touch with those classes. When we know our intro classes are coming in and they do, 20 sets of carrots and 20 sets of celery and 20 sets of onions, we go, well, don't compost that. We're going to use that for stock for the rest of your classes for the quarter. And so we're trying to look at these ways that, as we're in the classes and constantly working with them, how can we teach our students that this could be used for something else rather than just composting it or just throwing it away? Can it be used for a family meal project, coming up in the next day or so? Can they be reused for catering? So looking at those moments to train our students to look out for that is one of the things. Another one that we talked about already a little bit with the trash cans is our critical control points. Providing a smaller bin that holds less before it goes into the large bin for disposal, allowing less product to have the opportunity to go into the wrong location. Also allowing us more chances to look and go, oh, well, before we throw this away, can we use all these vegetable scraps to make vegetable stock? So just allowing more opportunities for that to be there. And then one of our biggest things with me and the crew that I work with is being integrated in the class as much as possible. Making sure we're going down and working with the classes whenever we get the chance, and helping that communication, helping them understand what we're doing with this, why we're doing it, why we're trying to save this, what it fixes, and how it helps prevent us from having to get an extra product to do the same thing that we could do with that product. And slowly letting them understand and change their own mind. And so that's the biggest part in my thoughts is we can't force them to change their mind, but if we encourage them and show them and let them change their own mind, then we get a much better end result and a much more product and concern from everybody rather than just from operations side.
Izzy, I want to highlight one of the things that you brought up here that I know anybody in academia will wonder how it happens, and that is integrating with the classroom. And I think that even more than us doing it within our own department, seeing that MCC facilities personnel and even folks from our trash hauler and from compost provider and the waste hauler for the recycling fryer oil, they all can feed back relatively quickly to the student almost, right? That sure, our facilities personnel aren't walking in and addressing the class, but they're walking in and engaging with an instructor during class in a way that is a cultural anomaly in higher ed. And I understand that, right? That when, if I was even elsewhere at Metro, to hear you say that would cause people to say, what? No way. Are you walking into a classroom and talking about the way the students and teacher behave in order to advance your sustainability initiatives? And so that is a challenge that we overcame before this was a thing for us to address, right? That our access and integration between what happens in the classroom and the kind of operational needs of our facility had already been integrated. And so that's not a small thing to overcome. I wish I had some pixie dust to share to say, here's how you would overcome that, but I don't know really how it happened. I know that it's the reality we live in, but it is not something that I know how it came to be. It came to be before I got here, and we've luckily continued to nourish it and keep it alive. But that is a critical function of the ability to be successful in a program like this, is communicating across that very light permeability of a barrier between inside the classroom and everything else that happens at an institution of higher ed. That inside the classroom space is very sacred, and finding ways where information and behavior passes between that barrier is harder to do in most places than we suffer in culinary and horticulture.
Oh yes, absolutely.
pollinators. So we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about other ways we're working through the HE STARS report to get higher scores, improve in the ground section specifically. So we have different native plantings around our horticulture area, and one of them that we worked on improving in the last year was our pollinator garden, which was kind of a defunct student space. Brian, you can hit the key. We updated it and kind of changed it from a more blocky layout and design to something that flowed better and had more kind of pollination niches that could be filled. So working with night blooming flowers, putting stuff in for not just honeybees and monarchs, which I'm sure everyone knows. We have lots of different pollinating species we need to care about. And so this was a way that we could kind of integrate a curriculum learning piece. We have a bunch of different classes that either collect bugs or try and identify bugs or learn about design and native plants. So this can get incorporated in a lot of ways. And was kind of a first step into expanding this to the rest of campus. So we can go to the next slide and talk a little bit about how in demonstrating kind of new pollinator habitat and working effectively on communicating well with our broader facilities and grounds department across the campus, we've kind of been able to build a level of trust that hasn't really existed maybe before the last few years, which has been kind of amazing and key to find out like this is the thing that's going to allow us to tackle some of these larger grounds issues that Sally helped us kind of come to in the sustainability planning that has been going on campus. So in building that level of trust and communication, I think we've also done the thing which Brian talked about, is not convince them that, you know, monarch habitat is a good value. We can look at this retaining pond at the bottom picture here and say, how can we put that into something that means you don't have to spray it twice a year with pre-emergent and then round up later in the summer? How can we incorporate native plants in there that increase, and then we get our thing where we are increasing diversity, having a new space to show students. And so we're kind of building on this the same way we built on composting in the ICA to help change the behavior, make it easier to put in pollinator habitat around campus. So again, yeah, first we're kind of hitting at that bottom level of the upside down pyramid Brian showed and diversifying the stuff that's already there. But we've got to kind of move up and find the beds that don't have anything that need kind of more care and attention and needed that level of trust to be able to plan on taking them on. So these are some of the new pollinator stuff we're doing on campus. Thanks.
So Tyler, this top picture is a right away, or at least that's what I think I call it, on kind of a traffic pattern. We're exploring more of those as part of a way to like make it easier on grounds and facilities personnel, that these aren't spaces that have to get, you know, mowed and trimmed and cared for and in all the same ways, while also meeting these other kind of biodiversity needs. So you're right on in saying that, you know, it's not the same kind of frequency of decision making that comes with, ooh, does this go to trash or landfill or compost? But it makes the behavior simpler, right? That when somebody says, oh, it's easier if that's planted in native flowering plants, all right, then sure, let's do that. That when you can choose the easy way and it's the right way, that's when you really get a confluence of support. Because to try to convince OG facilities folks that decreasing Roundup use is the goal of a project like this, you've got such a long argument to make that you just never win. And at an institution like this, I don't mean to pick on Metro, but in all bureaucracies, things that take a long time to decide die, right? I mean, that's what the committee is for, is to kill momentum. And so when it can get done without a committee, because you don't have to change people's minds, you just change a simple act of behavior, then you can find the win. then you can find the win. All right. So Sally, we're moving on to Q&A. I know you were going to monitor stuff in the chat and bring anything else up to us. I would encourage you all that are listening. First, I would say thank you to everybody for being here with us today, because this act of putting this together is super good for us, right? That Sally and Tyler and Casey and I, over the last few weeks of polishing and pulling this together, is a valuable experience for us, because it helps us take measure again of where we are and how well we work. And so we're getting a lot out of this anyway. The fact that we're getting to do it for you is a bonus to us anyhow, but we're certainly happy to address any questions, thoughts, pushes that you have that might make us move in a better direction. So Sally, what do we got?
Absolutely. We do have a few coming in. I did just want to make a couple other mentions. We did call this presentation Closing the Loop, and I think that Tyler mentioned this as well, but one way that we did that is that, we are sending all of our industrial compostables to Hillside Solutions. They are the only industrial composter in our region right now. And then we are ordering that final product back from them to help enrich our soils and to improve soil health and to do things that, pollinators we added in there, but it is another benefit that we are hoping to look at this from a really big picture angle, and to tackle multiple sustainability issues in one initiative. And I do have to make one additional mention. I know on Casey's slide, he was mentioning education and training, and that is a very specific challenge for us. We have a quarter system. That means we're getting new people in here every single quarter. So I just wanted to say a kudos, especially to the horticulture and to the culinary team, for being willing to take on that challenge and to say, yes, we are willing to continually train on this. Casey is wearing an apron right now, which I love so much, but they have different aprons. Staff members have aprons that say, hey, come ask me, like, where can stuff go? And so that gives them a very visual point, and they know that they can talk to the staff members and their instructors, because, everybody's had that moment where they walk up to the bin and be like, oh, what is this? And so, having staff members readily available, willing to ask those or answer those questions, has been fantastic. But with that,
your stream of thinking there addresses Lily's question in the chat about what do you do with the smaller bins when they're full. So, we've got these little 2-quart bins on the table, and certainly at the beginning of a course of a quarter, Casey and his crew, as well as the instructors for the class, are right in there in those moments, talking about what goes in those bins, and before dumping into the larger bin, just having eyes on it in that moment that it's streaming from 2-quart into 20-gallon is important too. Those are the moments to catch the plastic wrap and et cetera. And so it happens, and we're really at an advantage with the rhythm that the quarter system brings, because then everybody stays in this mode of always being attentive to people learning how to do this. I think it's harder to implement process like these when you kind of have a implementation phase and then a perpetual but very infrequent retraining that has to happen afterwards. That's when momentum gets to die. We get a rhythm that gets to happen every 12 weeks. It feels painful because every 12 weeks you got people that don't know what they're doing, but at least the people training have to continually know what they're doing, right? That it never feels dumb that Casey puts on that apron, because there's always a quarter of the people walking in the building that have never been here before. And so that's an advantage we suffer, not a disadvantage, is that rhythm keeps it fresh and keeps it important to us.
Mm-hmm.
I can answer this question about maintenance of the pollinator gardens. Ben, it's always good to hear from another gooey duck. So there's a couple things that happen with facilities. There are things that we in horticulture care very much about. And so those things happen kind of in close proximity to our buildings and our kind of essential home base. But then when we do things outside of that, there are times where we say, we will take care of this, or like these 10 trees we planted this year, we will maintain and you do not need to, or water and trim. And that comes from a kind of need from classes to make sure that we have some ownership of stuff. So there's sometimes for different areas that we're saying we will take that on as a ongoing maintenance. But for these kind of pollinator gardens moving forward, it's been really great that we can incorporate the upfront labor cost of renovating, planting, weed control into different class activities, so that our faculty's perennials class can do some of the, site plan mapping and even installation. And then maybe we have a turf grass class that can do the fall cleanup and mulching. And so we try and do that as much as possible. But also we do and have seen more buy-in from facilities. It's like, oh, you're going to plant it and we just cut it down every fall. Great, we'll do that. And that was something that I think wasn't possible a few years ago. Now, the next thing is we need to have that conversation about like, well, actually those echinacea stems are great nesting habitats for certain native beetles. So we need to think about like, the balance of how things look and how things actually function in the ecosystem. But I think we're getting to kind of some of those conversations are getting closer to them. So it's a
If you'd
mix.
have asked me, Tyler, 5 years ago, if the relationship between facilities and horticulture would be as symbiotic as it is, I would not have guessed we would have moved this direction. I mean, we're certainly not perfect at it, but small little successes over time have really started to lead to this in a way that's really spectacular. And I think they would say the same, right? That I think they looked at the relationship 5 years ago and said, they always just want us to do a bunch of stuff that they don't want to care about. And I think we heard that honestly. And I say we there lightly. I was not really the one that heard it effectively. You guys were. But I think that you got to come to it with that kind of honesty, right? That they're willing to say, you guys tried this project 10 years ago and it didn't work. We don't want anything to do with you. And for us to go, yeah, that's our bad. Let's figure out, even though you weren't here when that thing fell down. I think those are the keys to those moments for sure. And then finding ways to those small successes have really led back this kind of stuff.
So we do have one other question in the chat. Are there MCC sustainability efforts? Do we have a plan to reduce consumption of animal-based foods on campus, given their adverse impact on land use and other sustainability impacts? Brian, I will let you take most of that, but I would like to mention too that because of this partnership between horticulture and culinary, we cannot get more local on some of our sourcing than we already are because of that partnership of growing what we need, and it's 20 feet away. So that is one benefit. But Brian, I will let you take the reduction in animal-based foods. Excellent. Specifically in culinary. I will interrupt you a little bit longer. No. With our partners, like we do have a few small food areas on campus, our Starbucks, Lee Marie's, and Subway. We have not started that conversation with them. But our culinary department does have something called the bistro here that works into our hospitality program where students get to learn, how food service works.
So thank you, Sally. That's an excellent setup. Ken, I love the question. To answer it most directly, no, there is not a plan specifically in place to reduce animal-based foods on campus in general or specific to kind of culinary education. That said, we are in a boat that rises with the rest of the boats on the tide that is the public disposition towards animal use. That's a crappy word, but maybe appropriate in this sense. And so that's already the sentiment in lots of places. Now, that said, the sentiment in lots of places refers to how decision makers think about your question, right? That the person teaching our protein fabrication class or writing the menu for Sage Student Bistro or this person managing market purchasing and cost management class, all of them think that this needs to start happening, but the system is not in place for it to happen yet. And so I think what's going to happen, Ken, is as we purposefully move back up that pyramid, right? And start looking at how do we reduce incoming at the top of the food waste, at the food pyramid, that's going to happen relatively naturally. I will tell you that we are already a place that effectively changes hearts and minds about the way animals are used in the human food system, but we don't necessarily change behaviors all that well related to the overuse of them. I hope that that gap between how we want to be behaving and how we're actually behaving, I hope that gap is only filled by the excess we use in order to learn the lessons best, right? That I hope that that gap is filled by education, right? That we cut up 2 chickens when we only needed to eat 1 because we really needed to learn how to cut up 2 chickens. So the usage issue there, I hope, is related only to education. Now, go, Casey.
I'll add a little bit to that. In our proteins class and whatnot, we're teaching that process, of the breaking down of that product, but then we're also teaching about how to properly utilize all of it versus, when we break that chicken down, the bones aren't just going to trash. We're using those bones to make the stock. So we definitely look at that process of how can we utilize as much as possible.
Whole animal use.
Yeah, exactly. And then when we have, they're breaking down those 2 chickens, that second chicken then is saved and packaged to be utilized in another class that can utilize it for the quantity they need versus it just going to waste.
The heart of Ken's question, though, the heart of it is, do we have a plan? That answer is already no, but our inertia is leading us there. That's a crappy response and gets us no points in ASHE's report. But as that inertia turns into behavior changes or projected behavior changes, plans, we'll get there. What's really happening, though, at the root of culinary school at all times is the move towards those animal products being less at the center of the plate for their caloric value and more in the center of the cooking process for their flavor value. And that moves us to a way smaller portion. So when I look at next quarter's lunch menu in Sage Student Bistro, we have 3 protein items across the whole menu. That's it. Animal-based protein items across the whole menu. That doesn't mean 3 dishes with them, but it means only 3 sources for animal protein, 4 if you count eggs, different than chicken, I guess. But 3 sources. And so we're using whole animal, but they're also playing a very subordinate role in calories on the plate, even if they're a central role on flavor for the plate. So you might still be ordering the chicken crepes, which 10 orders of chicken crepes comes out of a chicken, rather than the old days of you could have a chicken sandwich or a fried chicken lunch where half of a chicken gets used for 1 portion rather than a chicken getting used for 10 portions. So if we're talking about that reduced consumption, the more you learn about how to coax flavor out of things, the more inherent you are able to do that. And we can approach it from more than one direction, right? That you can approach it from the the environmental impact of that, which is critical, but also the economic impact of that, right? That a chicken is expensive comparatively. And so stretching a chicken across 10 orders of crepes is way better than across 2 orders of crepes. And so when we can do that, we're also teaching our students to be successful in the business of running a restaurant, right? That business acumen is a critical component of what we teach, in addition to stewardship, right? That how to manage our resources effectively is an environmental and an economic undertaking. That was a long-winded answer when the real answer is no, Ken, we're not. We don't have a plan.
Okay, well, thank you. We do not have any other questions in the Q&A right now. So if any of our attendees do have questions, please feel free to enter those. We do have a little bit of time here before we go. I have one question for the 3 of you while we're here. It talks about impacts. So how many annually students would you say are going through your programs? Because I think one of the great things about higher education is when we start initiatives like this, it's not just within our MCC bubble, right? Like we are educating students and that can lead to a much broader scale than just,
Right.
maybe an office building doing some. So do you all have maybe a rough estimate of how many students might be running through your programs in a year?
650.
Mhm.
So that, if this really runs like a snowball dance,
Mhm.
if those 650 people leave with the habit, most of them will also leave with the belief. But if 650 leave with the habit, then the impact is immediate. If they leave with the belief and the belief strong enough that these behaviors are valuable, well, then they can convince somebody else who then also does it. And so the possibility for the impact to be exponentially positive is real. 650 students a year.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yep.
We did have one other question come in. Tyler,
Oh,
this is
awesome.
probably for you, but do you purchase pollinator plants or grow them on campus to incorporate into landscaping?
We use a mix of different for that. So we have a pretty established kind of, we like to call it a perennial library where we have plants by family and then different varieties within that species. So a lot of plants we're able to actually divide annually and move to different places around campus from that kind of library starter group of plants. We also have a lot of great native nurseries around here we can go to if we need plants to pick up. And then we also have 2 different indoor controlled growing spaces that we can start stuff from seed if we need to as well. So we've done all 3. Buying becomes a little easier when it's time crunch around it or when it's a fast moving project. But if we can plan it out ahead of time, there's 75% of the stuff is pretty easy for us to manage in our own greenhouse. So I would say a mix of those 3.
Great. Thank you. Okay. I'm not seeing any other Q&A questions. So I think that we are okay to go ahead and wrap up, but Brian, Tyler, and Casey, if you have any last comments you'd like to share with the group, but otherwise, thank you all for everyone joining us today. And I appreciate all of your hard work on this initiative. It's exciting to see these steps being taken.
Thanks, Sally, for pulling us together.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think we're good. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. And thank you again.